Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Speaking of Insurance podcast. My name is Aaron Bollinger.
I'm Brian Bollinger.
Today, we're going to be talking about what every employer loves.
Great employees.
Why do you love great employees, Brian?
Without great employees, being a manager, owner, boss, whatever you want to call it, supervisor, it's impossible. We got to have people working for us, doing a good job, delivering value to our clients, helping get the projects completed on time, preferably under budget, and make our jobs easier and lives better.
How do you make sure you hire the right ones?
That's a hard one, right? It's a bit of luck, obviously, a bit of skill. I think everybody should start with what they've actually done in the past as a baseline, see what hires they've had that have actually worked out, try to look for trends like in what was working. In some cases, some of my clients say, hey, I found somebody in high school, they were an intern, they eventually, learned the job and they were able to build them, up through like an internship, a journeyman and on to being a master, plumber or electrician, or even just an operator in a business. Then there's other people that say, gosh, I'm expanding my business. I need to have somebody experienced right now. I need somebody who can take a load off of my plate. And you can't hire a young person or a person without experience. You need somebody who's experienced, who knows what they're doing to help you get the job done.
That varies a bit, obviously, on industry, because if you have something like you say, like a trade, it might require more experience depending on what you're trying to go for. If you're more of a startup, you might want some more raw talent, or you might want some more experience, right? So it's just that perfect balance, and striking that perfect balance is nearly impossible. But what are some signs that employees or prospect employees show that could mean that they'll eventually be a good hire?
Well, there's an idea out there that you should hire slowly and then fire fast. Some people say that. Some people say you should hire, fast and fire slowly. I don't think there's any real, science when it comes to which way is the best. I think the best thing, though, is to actually understand what the role of your position is. Have a description of what you're doing. Try to factor that back into skills, and then actually look for personality traits that suggest the person's going to be competent and willing to learn for the long term and be good at what they're doing. So have an aptitude for whatever it is that the job demands.
What personality traits could some employees have or prospect employees have that are good signs?
Well, I think it's easy to start with what's a bad sign, right? A bad attitude, not being happy to show up for work, huffing, grumpy, that kind of stuff. Not really the kinds of things we want to have in an office environment or even a factory environment. Again, a toxic personality is really the challenge here. But again, if you're looking for, somebody you're trying to hire, you could call references, but honestly, most references are going to give glowing, reviews of what the person's done in the past. I mean, I'm even of the opinion, if you've had somebody and they weren't exactly great at your position or your job, if they're finding a new job somewhere else, I don't think it's beneficial to talk bad about them or give any negative thing. I mean, obviously there has to be aspects of that person that you liked and that's why you hired them. So one of my premises is I want them to be successful in their future lives, after they leave our company. So I actually have glowing reviews to people that I believe that, have the opportunity in the other position to excel.
Well, that's great. I mean, obviously, having a positive relationship even after the fact with your employees is important, not only because, the insurance, EPLI implications that it could have if you don't have that good relationship, but could you talk us through some of those potential, pitfalls in terms of that relationship deteriorating and you exposing yourself to some liability?
Well, as employers and bosses, everybody, we're always on the hook for everything. It doesn't matter what the question is. We're guilty. We're responsible. If we get sued, the cost of defending, our reputation can reach into the, low six figures. And we just really can't afford that. So, it's kind of like a good offense, is a good defense in this case, right? We want to be as defensive as we can be within reason. Again, we still are operating a business. If somebody's not performing, we really have to let them know, have, actual meetings with them, tell them what their job performance has been, things they can do, concrete things they can do to improve, and exactly what we need. A lot of times people get stuck in situations where they dig themselves a hole by, essentially making it where it's a personality thing, where I just don't like you and you just don't like me.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of contest is really toxic, and that's not going to be helpful for anybody. And you're unlikely to, as an employer in California especially, come out on top of those kind of fights. So it's something best avoided.
Yeah, especially with all the litigations, right? After the fact, people get fired. They claim a bunch of things, and if you have some words that you had said to them that weren't the nicest, then I mean, those things can come back and haunt you. And so obviously, not saying those things, not just because you don't want to get sued in the long run, but also because it's good to have relationships with people who have helped your business and who have been your employees. And so the best, key employees are absolutely essential to day-to-day functions, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a key employee. But could you walk us through some characteristics that some of your key employees have?
Yeah, well, again, we've had some excellent employees over the years. One characteristic though I do like with that positive attitude when we on the exit interview or exit of the company, a lot of times if they ever have another opportunity to come back to our agency and our business, they'll come back. I mean, willingly, or they'll refer people into our business. So it's not only just them as a actual key attribute or talent for your business, but also the fact that your reputation precedes you in the marketplace. And again, a lot of people can choose, especially when the job market's tight, 100 different employers to work for. You'd prefer to be their preferred one so you can get the best of the best talent. And again, your reputation does precede you. When it comes to actually employees, their talents and attributes, I think the big thing that I look for again is just attitude. Attitude and aptitude. Do they want to do the work? Are they interested in doing the work? You can try them out. You can try to give them an idea. I've seen some people do interviews where it's like, give them a little project to work on and see if they actually like it. Sometimes we do ride-alongs if they're younger people or, different levels of, trades or things like that. Try to get an idea of how they think. I think that's one of the other things that I think is really important. It's not just, can they do the work, but how do they think? And also, one of my secret questions is, tell me about a time where you had to work with some difficult people, and, a situation that didn't turn out well. And, how'd you approach it? What'd you do? And how did it ultimately, end up? It shows a lot of, grit and determination for some people, and some people have it and some people don't. And so that's something that I also look for is grit.
Yeah, grit. Grit's important. I mean, especially in the trades, right? That's one of those key things that you look for in your employees. And so obviously those type of employees, those ones who might be more experienced or less experienced, either way, it doesn't matter. How do we foster an environment as employers where these employees are incentivized to come work for us and stay working with us?
Yeah, well, sometimes we do benefit packages, flexible work hours, working from home. I mean, as you know, we've got a couple people that work remotely now. 5 years ago before COVID, we probably wouldn't have been as open to that as we are now. But it's not just us, right? It's around the country. I mean, I was talking to one of our clients, Steve. He used to be a recruiter for insurance, I think claims adjusters for workers' comp, I believe it was. At any rate, he was talking about how before COVID, nobody wanted to be remotely, and there were huge regional differences in terms of what people were making. He said, during COVID, that obviously was gone. And, they actually saw people in the Midwest start to earn more, and the people on the more expensive cities start to earn less. And there was less emphasis on, obviously, being in person during COVID. Some of that's kind of reversed, I feel like, but I believe that there still are opportunities for people to have good careers and not have to be in the office, 5 to 7 days a week, depending on, what your job is.
Yeah, and so I mean, one of the things is that some people do prefer that sort of hybrid, right, environment where they get to, come in some of the time, stay at home other times and get their work done nonetheless. Other things I wanted to touch on is a consistent paycheck, right? Making sure that you as an employer are providing them with a consistent paycheck, right, for their work hours and accurately reflecting those things, right? Making sure that they have security, feel security in their job too, right? What are some other things?
Well, just touching on that first one about that wage thing. I mean, we've had not a lot, but a few wage and hour claims. I'd say probably 10, 20 years ago it was a hot ticket thing. People were suing for this and suing for that, but they were also suing for lack of, not taking breaks and working through lunch. And so in California, at least, they're entitled to being paid for that time if they don't get their breaks. And there's a bunch of other rules in there. So we saw a lot of people, litigating against their former employers or even current employers saying they weren't being paid for breaks and lunches and things like that. So it's one of those things where you need to be working with a team of people that make sure that you know what's happening with the current laws. And, if you do choose a business owner to deviate from the recommendations, that you understand what you're getting yourself into. There's even things like prevailing wage for some of the trades where they pay, prevailing wage, union wages, if you will, so that there's not a disadvantage for non-union companies and non-union workers to, bid projects and things. And in those cases, there's a bunch of reporting requirements at the project level, but even on the payroll records, you need to make sure you keep that stuff. You well document who worked what, when, where, and how, so that if there was ever a claim in coming years, you can defend yourself against that. It's really hard, honestly. It's very hard to be an employer and to find good employees and keep good employees. But again, circling back to the idea of good employees and keeping them, the challenge really is, keeping the work meaningful, keeping them busy and occupied, keeping them so they can see a career advancement and a long-term potential with you as an employer. It's not always easy to do. I know there's times when people have recessions and things like that, and morale can drop down. But that's part of the challenge of being a boss and being a manager in a business. And most businesses work on a very small margin. I mean, one of the challenges people, struggle with is some of our business clients, they're working on a couple percentage points. You know what I mean? They're working on a 5% margin, a 3% margin, or maybe a 12 or 20% margin. So, I mean, every business is different and you can't really generalize to that level. But again, I think it's hard to, vilify, owners of businesses that are trying to operate a business. Obviously, if they're working actively in the business, they've got to pay themselves the wage, right? They could have worked somewhere else for, probably more money in some cases. So it's a passion I think that entrepreneurs have, and we're here to support that.
Yep. Okay. So we've talked about the development of relationships and, making sure that there's an environment that fosters and hopefully incentivizes and brings in those type of positive employees. What are some signs that that relationship with that employee might be, on the downhill and not indicating that, you want to start cutting ends with them, but just that, you need to have that conversation with that employee and make sure that they know that something's wrong with their performance.
Well, I think there's a couple things you generally see. One is you see some sort of a negative emotion between other employees and them. So that's like one aspect to it, is like a negative office dynamic or business dynamic. A second thing is just their attitude possibly being even negative towards the management or the bosses, supervisors. So you see that negative emotion and that becomes a bit of a concern. Sometimes people are just having a bad day, their dog died, their kid's sick, they're stressed out, they're having family problems. So, one other challenge of being a boss or a supervisor is to have that emotional intelligence to be able to understand what's going on with your staff outside of work and realizing that some things that they bring some of their baggage into the office. So sometimes a way you can kind of help them with their personal well-being, obviously support them through hard times when you can. But again, you can't always, let the quality of the work go down. You really can't ever, because somebody's having a bad day. And so there are times where you have to really, create an environment where it's moderately safe to talk about, but also where you might actually have to talk about performance improvement plans and talking about what they're doing great, what they're not doing great, and what they need to improve, and how how you're going to help them improve. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yeah, extending grace intentionally, right? Making sure that you're not just giving, all of the freedom in the world to the employee, right? I mean, obviously the job needs to get done, but at the same time, understanding circumstances and seeing how you can help them or work around these circumstances, especially when they get tough, because, life happens to everybody, employees, employers, everybody including, right? And so you had mentioned the need for emotional intelligence. I feel like that's a very undervalued thing, honestly, in some professions. And I think that as an employer, and as an employee, it's important to have that emotional intelligence as well as the actual intelligence to have that perspective and say, okay, realistically, my performance hasn't been very well, or okay, realistically, the employer or employee's performance hasn't been very well. It's time to have that conversation with them in a appropriate way, right? And so there's a point there.
Yeah, and I think also, like, if you've had a safe relationship with the employee, I think it's okay to ask, what's going on. And I always do prefer if an employee, does understand that their performance isn't as good as it was or as good as it needs to be. I think it's really smart to go ahead and sometimes be vulnerable on both sides. Obviously, you're not trying to destroy the employee. The cost of hiring and training a new employee or hiring the wrong employee, that's even worse, because then you got to rehire again. I mean, a lot of businesses spend, 50, 100 grand or more constantly replacing staff. That's because they have bad hiring practices. So, one of the things really, again, I get back to is looking at your hiring practice to make sure you're getting the right people in, making sure you've got a, decent to positive morale inside the office. And then, if people aren't fitting in or if people aren't working out, talking to them about it, but also possibly helping them find, better opportunities for themselves somewhere else and encouraging that. I mean, it's not about being mean or punishing people. It's about helping them get better.
Yeah, it is about helping people get better, right? I mean, we're all just trying to help one another, and I think that that's what employees and employers should be trying to do. But again, during that process, right, during the potentially downhill process, when you start seeing the signs, or just throughout all of it, you should be documenting things, right? How important is it for employers and employees to be documenting their conversations or things like that they have with one another, so then they're able to, if God forbid something happens on that, have evidence of it actually being this way instead of the way that somebody else is saying it is.
Well, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to document things, and it's a he said she said still. So having records is still good, but again, it's not a guarantee of anything. So, but again, it is a step in the right direction. Like a performance improvement plan is more of a formal review of somebody's lack of performance, if you will, or need to improve. So there's various steps. We start out soft, and then eventually we start to document more and more and more. Once you've gotten to the point of documentation, the probability of you getting a big turnaround, I think that's moderately unlikely. You might have to change the person's job assignments. You might be asking them to do too much or not being in the right position for them, or maybe their opportunities change or their needs for their business or their job have changed. So again, it's important that you understand what's happening both on and off the job for them, and also what you need as an employer. And if you can accommodate people, again, some people have disabilities or other things going on, FMLA leave, outside of the office that can impact the operation of your team. So, the challenge too of being a boss is you're either understaffed or overstaffed. You're never perfectly staffed. And so as you go through this process of being, improperly staffed, there are times when you're going to lean hard on your staff, and people might suffer burnout even. And when that happens, it's important to kind of understand what's going on and try to help support them with that well-being idea. And sometimes maybe a vacation will help them, or maybe there's some other thing you can take off their plate and give to somebody else. One thing that a lot of employees also overlook is the opportunity to grow. It's very rare that you get a lot of employees stepping up to take on new responsibilities or trying to learn new things. And I think that's really a mistake. I think that a lot of employees need to be willing to make mistakes, be willing to grow, be willing to learn new things, and push themselves a little bit, because I think that's where there's more money, more opportunity, and honestly, probably more career happiness.
That's the perfect way to round it off, right? I mean, nobody could have said it better than that.
Oh, probably somebody did, but that's what I said.
Awesome. Well, obviously, I think this conversation has been very helpful in terms of talking about that relationship between the employer and the employee, and how that starts, how it takes place, and then how some of the time it might end, and how important it is to just look out for people, and also extend them grace when appropriate, and obviously when necessary.
Exactly. So thank you so much, son.
Thank you. Great talking with you, Brian.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.